Welcome to Creative Community. I'm your guest host, George Atchison. And the fun part today is, as you see in the guest seat, it's your usual host, David Starkey. Welcome, David, to your show.
Well, thanks, George, and thank you for guest hosting.
No problem. I assume people know more about David, but just in case, former poet laureate of Santa Barbara, he was the founder of Santa Barbara City College's creative writing program. You've written numerous books of poetry. You've written textbooks for college. And now you've written a novel, The Wonderful Poor Ghost, and that's the occasion for this interview. How does it feel to be in this seat instead of this seat?
Yeah, it feels really strange. I don't know what you're going to say, and now I realize my poor guest, I never write any questions down, I have no idea what I'm going to say. It's exciting, though. It's fun. I mean, I think I always am trying to help other people get the word out about their work, and so it was really generous of the folks here at TVSB and you, George Atchison, for helping me get the word out about my novel.
Okay, well, speaking of poor guests and poor ghosts,
yeah.
What would you give as your elevator speech when you're trying to pitch the book to publishers,
right.
And you did land one? What's the...
Well, I said to publishers, this is a book about, it starts with a plane crash. A plane crashes into the back of someone's yard, and on it is one of the most famous rock bands in the world. I kind of call them a working man's U2, not quite as famous. And after the plane crashes, there's a swarm of the fans of Poor Ghost who come on this poor guy's property, and they want to be around where the plane crashed, and they won't go away. And they go away, and then they won't go away. And so that's kind of one thread of the story. And then the other is an oral history of this band, Poor Ghost, from the beginning until just before their demise. And the oral history was inspired by a book called Please Kill Me, An Oral History of Punk. A great book. And my characters are a lot less wild than, say, Iggy Pop. But that was my inspiration. And then after I had completed a full draft of the book, your wife, in fact, asked me, have you heard of this book called what's it called? Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Reed Jenkins. Mm-hmm. And as you see, I couldn't even remember the name of the book, but I had never heard of it. I subsequently read it, great book, became a kind of famous mini-series. And so I think I'm writing a little bit in the shadow of that book, because half of my book works in a similar way. But my characters don't kind of fight as much on stage as they do in terms of the other book.
Plus, they're not secretly Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know what they were going to secretly be Weezer, but they just got a lot bigger the longer I wrote the novel. Yeah.
Sounds good. Would you be interested in reading a little passage for us so we get a flavor of the book?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, George. I will read just the first half of the first page. When the plane crashes in your backyard, you are sitting in the living room flipping through the cartoons in the latest New Yorker. You live just a few miles from the Santa Barbara airport, so it's not unusual to hear low-flying planes. The sound of this one, though, is very different, much louder and getting closer fast. You drop the magazine and hurry to the plate glass window just as a small jet appears for a moment to your right. Then the next moment is slicing into your pine tree, slamming into the earth, and bursting into flames. A huge plume of black smoke rises from the bottom of your backyard. Strangely, the first thing that comes into your head is a lyric from an old Tom Petty song about an airplane falling on his block. Then a shiver runs up your spine and your hands begin shaking so hard that you have to clasp them together to still them. Your daughter Victoria is visiting and she begins screaming from the family room, "Jackson, oh my God, Jackson." For the first time ever, you are glad that Victoria is childless. Jackson is her dog. And then they run out into the backyard and the novel gets going.
Certainly gets going. I mean,
Yeah.
it starts with a crash. That's very dramatic.
Yeah.
One of the other striking things about that, and I know that continues throughout the book, having read it,
Right.
that you use the second person for those passages in the book, the sort of the narrative of Caleb.
Right.
And what drew you to try to do that in that way? I mean, part of it's the mystery of who is speaking
Right,
to him,
right.
and it does get resolved, and
Right.
we'll leave that for the readers to
Right,
find out on
right.
their own. But why do you want to do that part
Well,
that way?
you know, I was always, Lori Moore's self-help stories from, that would be back in the 80s, probably.
Yeah.
I thought they were great. You do this, you do that. And so I think the second person is a pretty nifty thing. You know, on the positive side, it allows the reader to just become that person. Some people find it annoying because they're like, well, you do this, no, I wouldn't do that. So that's the trade-off. But as you say, there's a very specific technical reason for using it that I don't reveal until the final page of the book.
And speaking of the format of the book, so there's the oral history sections that come through. There's the sections we were just talking about Caleb in the second person. But then there's many other ways you introduce all kinds of different kinds of text, including a great satire of next door, things like that.
Right.
How early in the process of writing the book did you say, I want this multiplicity of approaches and voices in there?
Pretty early on. I think I started the book in the third person. I changed it to the first person, and that just kind of, I knew I wanted to have this going back and forth between the oral history and the narrative of the plane crash. Once I settled on the second person, though, suddenly things kind of opened up for me, and then I realized, oh, these things are so different, they need to be spliced together somehow. And I can do it in an artful way that moves the narrative forward, that towards the end answers a lot of the unanswered questions about the plane crash, get a lot of comedy in there. So my aesthetic, I think across genres, is kind of dark humor. That's sort of what I do. And so it allowed me to get some pathos in there, and then also, like, for instance, with the next door post, the neighbors are just really unhappy that these guys are here, and so that was a nice way to kind of express that.
As the neighbors are unhappy next door
Yeah,
about anything.
It's very real. It's very
So,
true to life, yeah.
This situation would definitely
Right.
upset the apple cart there.
Right.
So you talked a bit about your different genres, and I want to ask you a few questions about that. Obviously, you've published more as a poet. This is your first published novel. Right. I think you've written some previously, right? What was it that you think was an advantage trying to write a novel coming from a stronger, perhaps, poetry background, or at least one you were certainly more comfortable with?
Yeah, well, I started off back as an undergraduate as a fiction major at UC Davis, as a creative writing major. And so that's what I wanted to do. That's what I started writing in high school. I shifted that later on when I met David Case, the guiding spirit for Gunpowder Press, our local poetry press. And then I kind of realized, oh, you can do some of the same things, and I have a knack for doing this. So having written poetry for 30 plus years, I think I was attentive to detail, to images. Elizabeth Bishop, the great poet, says poetry is mostly description. And I think I tried to make it so that my readers could always picture where they were in the story. And then just on a really useful level for me personally, a lot of the lyrics are from my own poems. So a lot of the greatest hits of Poor Ghost have titles that are just kind of obscure poems written by me. I did bring in some songs I've written, and there's little bits of lyrics. So that was helpful just to kind of round out the story and to make them feel like a real band who had actually written real songs.
Yeah, I mean, including that, obviously, Circus Maximus gets in there at some point and things, so you have a whole lot of your greatest hits of your poems.
Right, yeah.
Power.
I tried to get, when I wanted the song to be actually pretty good, I would take my best poems, and if I wanted it to be kind of weird and offbeat, then I would take my maybe less great poems.
Then just write something right off the
cuff,
cuff, right?
Right.
The flip side of that question then would be, what parts of trying to write a novel seem more difficult coming from a more poetic mindset?
Yeah, well, I think, it's interesting that of all the books I've written, and as you said, I've been fortunate to write a lot of books from very small publishers and some very big publishers like my textbook publishers. This is the first book I really feel like people have picked up and read because they were interested in it and talked to me about it, when this part happens. So what's difficult is writing a book that is going to keep people turning the pages. With a book of poems, you read 20 poems and you put it down and you pick it up. That's no big deal. You pick it up later. But this has to be something that you want to keep turning the pages and wanting to find out what happens next. So the sense of suspense is crucial, I think, to just any kind of fiction writing. I really took a chance there with all these little chapters of oral history. Every time that comes in, that stops the narrative dead, and hopefully what the band is talking about is interesting enough to keep the reader going on to the next narrative section. I did do a reading up in Sacramento recently, and the bookstore guy who organized the reading, that was his favorite part, but like you and me, he was a music nerd. So for people who are music nerds, this is a great book, whatever. I mean, it's just so full of details and stuff like that. But if you're not like most people, then I have to sort of keep you reeled in with telling a good story. And that's hard.
Yeah. Let's nerd out for a moment then and talk about the music part. Did you, at any point, did you write the whole oral history at once and then disperse it through the book, or did it get written along the way?
I wrote this entirely in the order in which it appears.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then how did you decide? I mean, it must be fun doing that, creating this big band, because you're in at least 3 bands as far as I know. There's probably more. You've written the lovely little theme jingle for Creative Community. I don't know if you get enough credit for that. So music is something that does interest you and you spend time with.
Right.
What was it like getting to sort of create this superstar band? How did that feel to have those dreams that unfortunately you have not reached in your personal musical
career? No, that's right. It was literally a dream come true.
Yeah. And what was that like?
I mean, it was a lot of fun. If I could read one passage.
Sure. That'd be wonderful.
So one of the things I have my band do is that they get a Grammy Award, and they win it the same year that you two in real life won their Grammy Award for the Joshua Tree. So I'll just say the drummer, the singer, or whatever, so that you know who's speaking. So this is their manager. This was the heyday of music videos on MTV. So I told the guys we were going to have to make one for each single. They weren't thrilled, and then the lead singer. If you look at the videos of 1987, there's a lot of bad hair and a lot of bad acting. I did not want to be part of that, but I liked how Peter Gabriel was getting around it with the videos for Sledgehammer and Big Time, claymation and stop action. He was in it, but he wasn't the star. And then the bass player. Michael got in touch with Stephen Johnson, who directed Peter Gabriel's video, and Stephen was able to do something similar for us with Dreadful Trade and Traveling by Train, 2 poems of mine. The drummer. I especially like the sequence in Traveling by Train when the train becomes Stewart's face, and then it morphs into a rocket ship that crashes into Saturn, and then claymation figures of the band emerge, and we're rocking out in space. That was cool. And so this is a little taste of the different personalities of the characters. And then when they win the award, Bono is really unhappy because he was expecting to get the record of the year. And so the singer isn't ready for the speech. And so the drummer, who's kind of the most monetized person in the band, steps up and delivers it.
It's good there's always a monetized
Yeah,
person, right?
that's right.
Reading back through the book, it hit me too that Poor Ghost, PG, you refer to them as PG a lot, and people talk about Peter Gabriel as PG a lot too. So it's kind of interesting.
I didn't make that connection.
To get even nerdier on you.
Yeah. See? And there are also a number of Shakespearean drops in there. That's from Hamlet, Alas, Poor Ghost, and there's a lot of sense of people who have left us, and how do we deal with them?
Yes, well, we'll get to the tonal shifts in a moment. A little more with the music. You do bring in real people like you too. There's a great scene with at an Amy Mann show. Right. Robert Christgau, the critic, the dean of critics.
The dean of rock critics,
gets dropped in. How did you decide? I mean, obviously, sometimes you're creating people whole cloth, and then you're using people who are real doing things that they haven't done.
Right,
obviously, Jeff Tweedy never commented on Poor Ghost's albums.
Right. Well, I remember you asking me, well, aren't you going to get sued for that? When you were reading a draft of the book. And I checked with my editor, and evidently if you say, that everything is made up, basically, and also, no one's doing anything nefarious. They're just interacting with a rock band. But I thought that would give it that sense of reality if I put in as many people as I could, and then sprinkle in little made-up folks. Mm-hmm. But like their last or their penultimate album is produced by Timbaland, which is just so unlikely. So I had a lot of fun, like picking producers who were either of the moment and appropriate for the moment, or in this case, of the moment and something that you wouldn't associate with this sort of aging rock band.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that really hits me is there's a very serious side to this as well as the playful side, and trying to negotiate those two tones. It's not even two tones, it's many tones, many levels of tone. You have COVID happening, QAnon is there, but then one of their biggest hits is, I want to make sure I get this right, spaghetti bolognese and a can of Coke, which they come to hate, but which happens with bands, obviously. Yeah, right. So what were you thinking about to keep that wide range of tonalities in balance? And it makes me think a little bit, there's a line about laughter in a Connie Crane interview, the wife of your main character who's not in the band, that talks about laughter. And I don't know if you would want to read that passage, and then we can talk about it. Or...
Well, it's no narrative surprise that the wife of the protagonist has passed away due to COVID prior to the book's beginning, and so that's kind of one of the reasons that allows him kind of emotionally or forces him to allow these people into his house, into his home, and mostly into his backyard. And his backyard, as you know, it looks a lot like my backyard. And one of the things I've been saying as I've been talking about the book is that there's the old saw about write what you know, and I do think that's true. But for me, what was important was write where you know. And so I had my backyard to go look in. I had my pine tree, which fortunately is still around. But I was riding through the seasons from September into the new year, and I could just go outside and see what was happening. And that was really, so I'm now kind of speaking to aspiring novelists. That's a really important thing to do. But here, so Connie Crane is being interviewed by, she, like Poor Ghost, is kind of a, not quite a Roz Chast, but just below that. She's talking with the interviewer at the Paris Review for an Art of Comics in 2018. The interviewer says, "You seem to love drawing animals, particularly dogs and cats. Has your house always been a menagerie of pets?" Connie: "Actually, I don't have any pets, although that's primarily due to the fact that I'm allergic to dog and cat dander. but you seem to have, and I hope this doesn't sound pretentious, a deep understanding of dogs and cats, the way their minds work, and how that tracks or doesn't with human cognition. Interestingly, you also get a lot of mileage out of the canonical Western philosophers. And then she says, oh yeah, they're laugh riots. And then the interviewer, I'm thinking right now of the comic where two cats are sitting by the side of the road looking at their friend who's just been run over by a car. One says, if you want the present to be different from the past, study the past. And then she says, a lot of people really hated that one. And so that's like, I think, a good example of, there's a lot of comedy in there, but there's also a lot of pathos because we know this is a woman speaking from beyond the grave. She is one of the poor ghosts of the book.
Yeah. And obviously you had to come up with these comics too then, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have to draw them, but
yeah,
at least
I had to
visualize
imagine them, yeah. Yeah.
That's not necessarily another talent of yours, is
It's not.
Even though there might be someone who
There
draws
might
in
be
your
someone
family.
I know, yeah, but we won't mention that on camera.
Yes, okay. Continuing with the where, you really do capture a sense of Galita and Ivy and all those things. Some of the photos are actually of your street and yard and things. Right. Is there a point where you were worried you were going too far with that it was like revealing in some way?
Well, I mean, I live, as you know, in what's called no-Lita, so in a kind of a no man's land between Galita and Santa Barbara, and I mentioned that in the book. So that, in a way, that already kind of gave me a little hazy, ambiguous space to work with. But you know, one of our friends was driving up to my house yesterday, and she's like, "Oh, this reminds me of that scene in Poor Ghost when they're driving up to the house." I didn't do anything that I think would embarrass my real neighbors or real people. I think I was pretty conscious of that. But the landscape itself, I wanted to draw on that as much as I could.
Mm-hmm. So you've talked a little bit about the writing process. You did, when you found that second person, at that point, you were able to kind of write straight through for the most part, that it just seems like a book that's written in fragments. It's easy to probably write fragments separately and then sprinkle them in, then just do it.
Yeah, it seems like that would have been the case, but for me, once I knew what I wanted to do, I just really wrote through, and I was writing 6 or 7 hours a day, which you as a fellow person who's written a novel, that's something that you can jump into pretty hard.
And did you outline in things ahead of time, or?
I think I had maybe 1 page of notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you knew the mystery of the plane crash when you started, or did you write?
That was evolving what happened.
Yeah.
So for people who haven't read the book, which is probably most people watching, the one person in the band does survive. It's the bass player. And that, again, is a kind of an inside joke, because the bass player never gets any respect. So in my book, he at least survives this plane crash, although he, as you said, at the Amy Mann concert, he kind of gets his just dessert.
You are working on a new novel, I believe, already, too, aren't you?
Yeah.
I don't know if you would like to talk a little bit about where you are in the future, because in some ways it semi-connects. It's in the same general world, right?
Yeah, so it's a novel about 2 brothers in an aging folk band that was popular in the 1980s, and they go to Japan because one of their songs is now a clip in a Honda commercial, and so they have a chance to go around. They go to all these places where like they play a wedding in Sapporo, but the wedding person only wants them to play the hit song over and over and over to get a chance to play their other songs. They're going to this big flower farm that's like a big tourist attraction. They're imagining they're going to play in this big barn with this great sound system, but that's being renovated, so they have to play in the gift shop. And so those are the sort of things that happen to them. And then I've finished that novel. I've got 1 more that I'm working on right now, and that novel will take one of the secondary characters from this book, one of the secondary characters from the next book, and it will put them in a post-apocalyptic world where almost everyone has disappeared, and it's called The Last Band in the World. And so these 4 people come together, and they realize that they need an audience, so they go searching across America, and they finally find one person to listen to their their songs.
It sounds like a Jim Jarmusch movie.
Yeah,
or something.
it could be. It could be.
So a whole trilogy then, by the time you're done.
If all works out, yeah, this is just part one.
That wasn't the planning to start, though.
No, it wasn't. But once I had the second book, I realized that they're all music themed. You don't need to read any of the other two in order to enjoy one of the three books. But by the time you get to the end of the third one, things that have happened in these first two will kind of have a little more resonance, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel this has changed your poetry at all, having spent more time working on fiction lately?
You know, I think it's just made me write a lot fewer poems because this has been really exciting, and also just going back to what was kind of my initial love, what I really wanted to do. I think poetry will always be there for me to return to, and I don't know if I've learned much from writing these two novels when I go back to writing poems, but I don't feel like I've unlearned anything as a poet, if that makes sense.
One would hope.
Yeah.
It is interesting because the way you described, at least the writing of the first, Poor Ghost, you sort of approach a little bit more from the poetry end where you wanted to discover what the characters had to show you, as opposed to the people who sit and have a full outline and are ready to go and like have to hit these marks because they know what's going on. And that, in my head, is one of the differences between poetry writing and fiction writing sometimes. Yeah. For those who really do it.
Yeah.
But maybe duffers like us do something else.
That's right. Well, thank you for interviewing me, George.
No problem. And since it's your show, I'll let you do the outro since you have all the experience at it.
Thank you, George Atchison, for being the guest host. Creative Community is a co-production of TVSB in Santa Barbara and Caps Media in Ventura. I am your usual host, David Starkey, with my guest host, George Atchison, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.